Ryan Parker had always prided himself on being a man of dedication, whether in business, fatherhood, or marriage. His wife, Sophie, was the love of his life, and their daughter, Lily, was his world. He had built a stable, successful life, ensuring that his family had everything they could ever want. As Valentine's Day approached, Ryan planned something special. He made a reservation at La Toile, the restaurant where he had first proposed to Sophie years ago. It was a place filled with memories, where candlelight reflected in her eyes, where she had once whispered yes with a trembling smile, sealing their future together. That morning, he kissed Sophie before heading to work. "I made dinner reservations for us tomorrow night," he told her, excitement in his voice. "I think we deserve a little time to ourselves." Sophie hesitated, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself. "Oh, Ryan, I already promised the girls I'd go out with them. We planned it weeks ago." Ryan blinked, his smile faltering. "Valentine's Day?" She nodded quickly, brushing past him toward the kitchen. "Yeah, it's just a girls' night. Nothing big." A flicker of disappointment rose in his chest, but he swallowed it. Sophie was an independent woman, and he respected that. Maybe he should have asked earlier instead of assuming. Still, a tiny voice whispered in the back of his mind. Had she forgotten how much this day meant to them? "All right," Ryan said finally, forcing a small smile. "Another time, then." Sophie leaned up and kissed his cheek. "Of course. Love you." He held on to those words, trying not to let the disappointment settle in. Valentine's Day arrived, and Ryan spent the evening at home with Lily, watching her favorite animated movie. As she giggled beside him, he reminded himself that this was enough. His daughter was enough. But when Lily fell asleep, the silence pressed in on him. He picked up his phone, debating whether to text Sophie to see how her night was going. But something stopped him. Instead, he scrolled absent-mindedly through social media. Then, he saw it. A video, posted by an account he didn't recognize, was spreading like wildfire. The caption read, "A Valentine's surprise she'll never forget." Ryan wasn't the type to pry into random posts, but something about it drew him in. He tapped the video, and his world shattered. The screen lit up with an upscale restaurant, dimly lit with the soft glow of fairy lights. Right in the center of it all, standing before a table draped in white linen, was Sophie. She looked stunning in a deep red dress he had never seen before. And kneeling before her was another man. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. The man, someone Ryan had never met, held out a small velvet box, a diamond ring sparkling inside. Gasps filled the restaurant. A voice in the video murmured, "Oh my God, is she going to say yes?" Ryan's heart pounded against his ribs as he watched Sophie lift a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. For a second, there was no sound. Only the video's dramatic pause, the weight of anticipation. Then came the moment that killed something inside him. The man slipped the ring onto Sophie's trembling finger. Applause erupted. The camera zoomed in on Sophie's face, her lips parted in shock, her body stiff. Ryan's vision blurred. His hands trembled as he gripped the phone, replaying the video over and over. The caption, the angle, the lighting, everything screamed romance. And the world was watching. His wife, the woman he trusted, betraying him in the most public, humiliating way possible. When Sophie came home later that night, Ryan was waiting. He had rewatched the video so many times that it had seared into his mind, every second like a fresh stab. She stepped inside, her coat draped over her arm, humming softly, oblivious. "Where were you?" Ryan's voice was quiet, but the storm beneath it raged. Sophie froze, her eyes locking onto his. "I told you, I was out with the girls." Ryan stood up slowly, phone in hand. Without a word, he pressed play. The moment Sophie saw the video, her face drained of color, her lips moved, but no sound came out. He let the silence hang between them before speaking. "Tell me, Sophie, what the hell is this?" Ryan, he didn't let her finish. He slammed the phone onto the counter. "You lied to me." Tears filled her eyes, but Ryan had never felt so numb. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered. He let out a cold laugh, shaking his head. "Not what it looks like. My wife was just proposed to by another man while I was at home with our daughter, thinking you were out with friends." He exhaled sharply, hands clenched into fists. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Sophie stepped forward, reaching for him, but he took a step back. "Ryan, please. Just let me explain." "Explain?" His voice was razor-sharp. "Explain how you let another man slide a ring onto your finger? Explain how the entire world got to see my wife being claimed by someone else before I even knew what was happening?" Tears rolled down her cheeks, but Ryan's heart had turned to stone. "I'll never forgive you for this," he said. Sophie let out a choked sob. "Ryan, don't." But he was already walking away. The legal proceedings moved faster than Sophie could comprehend. Ryan had money, power, and a lawyer who was relentless. He filed for divorce immediately, citing infidelity. Sophie tried to fight for Lily, but Ryan was 3 steps ahead, presenting a case that left her with nothing. The viral video worked in his favor. Public perception painted Sophie as an unfaithful wife, and no judge wanted to side with a woman who had humiliated her husband on such a grand scale. When the final ruling came down, Ryan left the courtroom victorious, but he felt nothing. Sophie approached him one last time, her face pale, her eyes hollow. "Ryan, please, don't take Lily away from me." He stared at her, a woman he once loved, and said the words that sealed their fate. "You lost that right the moment you betrayed me." Sophie broke down as Ryan turned his back on her for the last time. He walked away with full custody of their daughter, taking everything from Sophie, her family, her stability, and the life they had built together. And he never looked back. That night, Ryan sat alone in the dark, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. The video played once more on his phone, over and over, burning into his mind. Outside, the world moved on. Inside, something inside him had died forever. The years that followed Sophie's betrayal were a winter that never thawed in Ryan Parker's heart. His love had turned to stone, his warmth to ice. The man who once cherished family dinners and bedtime stories became a ghost of himself, present in body but distant in spirit. Ryan threw himself into his work, building his company, Parker Enterprises, into an empire. Success became his refuge, his weapon, his proof to the world, and to himself, that he had won. He was now a mogul, his name in headlines, his face on magazine covers. Wealth poured in, and power followed, but joy never did. His mansion, though grand, echoed with silence. The laughter that once filled its halls had vanished. Ryan convinced himself that he didn't need happiness, only control. The only person he truly cared about was Lily. She was his pride, his reason, his everything. Yet, as she grew, she became a mirror that reflected the cracks in his soul. Lily Parker, now a teenager, carried her own burdens, ones she didn't fully understand. She grew up believing her mother had abandoned her, shattered their family, and destroyed her father's heart. Ryan never said the words, but his silence screamed them. Whenever Lily asked about Sophie, Ryan's response was cold and brief. She made her choices. The absence of answers became a wall between them. Lily felt the loss of something she never fully had. School events, birthdays, and holidays. Her mother's absence was a shadow that never left. Why did she leave me? Lily would wonder in the solitude of her room, her heart aching for a face she barely remembered. As the years passed, her wonder turned into bitterness. She resented Sophie for the empty seat at every milestone and hated her for the sadness that clouded her father's eyes. But Sophie had never truly left Lily, at least, not in her heart. From the moment Ryan took Lily away, Sophie fought to reach her. She wrote letters, hundreds of them, each filled with love, regret, and a desperate hope that her daughter would hear her side of the story. She mailed them to every address she could find. Each envelope was carefully sealed, each page stained with tears. But the letters never reached Lily, because Ryan made sure they didn't. He intercepted everyone. His personal assistant knew to hand them to him unopened. He would glance at Sophie's familiar handwriting, his jaw tightening, and toss them into the fireplace without a second thought. He told himself he was protecting Lily from confusion, from lies, from a woman who had shattered their lives. But deep down, he was protecting himself from reopening wounds he refused to acknowledge. Sophie's life had unraveled the moment the divorce was finalized. Stripped of custody, assets, and reputation, she became a pariah. The viral video that had destroyed her marriage also ruined her name. She lost her job. Friends distanced themselves. Doors closed in her face. She moved from motel to motel, working menial jobs to survive. The once vibrant woman who had graced charity galas now waited tables to make rent. But through every hardship, Sophie clung to one thing: her love for Lily. On every birthday, she mailed a gift with a card. On Christmas, she sent letters filled with memories and apologies. She tried calling, but her number was blocked. She tried visiting, but security turned her away. Her world was reduced to watching her daughter grow from a distance, through glimpses in magazines, news articles about Ryan's success, and the occasional social media post. The greatest agony was knowing Lily hated her, and not knowing how to fix it. By the time Lily turned 15, her heart had hardened like her father's. She was brilliant and driven, but cold. She excelled in school but made no lasting friendships. The only person she let close was her father, even though his love felt guarded. One day, during an argument, she snapped. "Why did you even marry her if she was such a monster?" she shouted. Ryan's face darkened. "Because I didn't know who she truly was." "Then why did she never try to come back for me?" Lily demanded. Ryan's jaw clenched. "She didn't deserve you." The conversation ended with slammed doors and broken hearts. But the universe has a way of revealing cracks in even the strongest walls. One rainy evening, while searching for a book in Ryan's study, Lily stumbled upon a drawer left slightly ajar. A flash of color caught her eye. An envelope, old and worn, with her name scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting. Her pulse quickened. She pulled it out, and as she opened it, her eyes scanned the page. "My sweet Lily, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I have to try. I love you more than anything. I never chose to leave you. I never stopped fighting for you. I hope one day you'll hear my side. I pray you'll forgive me." Mom, the letter shook her to her core. Confusion and anger swirled inside her. She rifled through the drawer and found more letters, dozens, all unopened, all addressed to her. Her hands trembled as she realized her mother had been trying to reach her. Lily stormed into the living room, her face flushed with emotion. "Dad!" she yelled, her voice shaking. "What is this?" She threw the letters onto the table. Ryan's expression turned to stone. "Where did you find those?" "In your study. You've been hiding them from me?" Ryan's voice was tight. "I was protecting you." Lily's voice cracked. "From what? From knowing my mother didn't abandon me? From the truth?" Ryan's hands curled into fists. "She destroyed our family, Lily. She doesn't deserve you." Tears streamed down Lily's cheeks. "And what about what I deserve? Did I deserve to live without knowing she was trying to reach me? Without having a chance to decide for myself?" Ryan's lips pressed into a thin line, his chest heaving, but he said nothing. That night, for the first time in years, Ryan stood alone in the darkness, the letters spread out before him. Sophie's words, filled with raw pain and love, echoed louder than his anger. In his pursuit of vengeance, had he become the villain he thought he was protecting Lily from? And for the first time since that Valentine's Day, Ryan felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel: doubt. The night Lily found the letters marked the beginning of a storm, a tempest that would tear through every lie, every silence, and every wound that had festered for years. But it wasn't the end of her search. It was only the beginning. The letters haunted her. Each word from her mother felt like a whisper from the past, brushing against wounds she didn't know she carried. She read them over and over until the ink felt carved into her memory. But doubt lingered. Could her father have been wrong? The man who had raised her, protected her, and loved her. Could he have truly kept the truth from her out of spite? The walls of the life she thought she knew were cracking, but she needed more. More than letters. She needed proof. It was a rainy Sunday when Lily, desperate for clarity, sought refuge in the family's grand library. Dusty shelves and forgotten corners felt safer than the cold distance that had settled between her and her father since their confrontation. Her fingers grazed the spines of old books until one, with a worn leather cover, slipped from the shelf and landed with a heavy thump. As she picked it up, something fluttered from between the pages, a folded, yellowed envelope. Her name was on it. Her breath caught. Another letter. But this one felt different, older, hidden, and never meant to be found. With trembling hands, she unfolded it and read, "My dearest Lily, if you ever find this, it means the truth has waited far too long. I never betrayed you or your father. I was trapped. That night, the one your father hates me for, I was set up. My ex from college, Darren, found me weeks before Valentine's Day. He threatened to release false stories about your father's company. Horrible, fabricated scandals that could destroy everything he built. I refused to meet him, but he wouldn't stop. He said if I met him once, he'd leave us alone. I thought I could handle it. I thought I was protecting your father. But he brought a camera crew and staged that awful proposal. He wanted to ruin me, and he did. The video. Your father only saw what Darren wanted the world to see. He never stayed to see me reject him. He never let me explain. I lost everything that night, except my love for you. That I will never lose. Forever yours." Mom Lily's knees gave out, and she collapsed onto the floor. The letter clutched to her chest as a sob ripped from her throat. She found her father in his study, where the air was always cold and the curtains always drawn. He sat behind his massive desk, reviewing contracts, the face of a man who lived and died by control. But tonight, he would lose it all. "Dad." Her voice cracked, heavy with restrained tears. "Did you know?" Ryan glanced up, his brow furrowing. "Lily!" She slammed the letter down on his desk, her eyes blazing. "Did you know about this?" Ryan's face paled as his gaze dropped to the paper. His fingers trembled as he read. The color drained from his face, and for the first time in her life, Lily saw something in her father she never expected: fear. Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "In a book, hidden, where you couldn't burn it." Her voice was sharp, bitter. "She was set up, Dad. She never betrayed you. You destroyed our family over a lie." Ryan's chest heaved as the ground beneath his world crumbled. No, that can't be." He gripped the desk as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "You never listened to her." Lily's voice rose, her pain raw and unchecked. "You let your anger blind you. She was protecting you, and you ripped everything away from her." Ryan's hands shook, his nails digging into the wood. His voice broke. "I saw the video. You saw what he wanted you to see." Lily screamed. "You didn't see her rejection. You didn't see her fight for you." His knees buckled, and he sank into his chair, his face hollowed by disbelief. I thought she lied. I thought she broke us." "You broke us," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "You kept me from my mother. You stole my choice. And for what? Pride." A silence, heavy and suffocating, filled the room. The fortress of certainty Ryan had built around himself lay in ruins, and the full weight of his mistake crashed down on him. His voice, when it came, was shattered. What have I done?" Lily's face was streaked with tears. "You ruined everything." Her voice was cold now. "And you ruined her." Ryan's hands covered his face as a sound escaped him, a sound Lily had never heard before. A broken, gasping sob from a man who had spent years drowning his heart in steel and fire. I was so sure, he choked. I thought I was protecting you. You destroyed her. Lily cut him off, her voice sharp and final. You destroyed us. For a long, harrowing moment, Lily stood there, watching the man she had once seen as a hero crumble. But the years of lies and silence had left scars that no apology could heal. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away, the letter still clutched in her hand. Lily! Ryan called after her, his voice desperate, shattered. Please, but she didn't stop. The door closed with a final, echoing click, and Ryan was left alone in the ruins of his world. The fireplace, where so many of Sophie's letters had turned to ash, crackled mockingly. His knees hit the floor. His hands pulled at his hair as his grief tore from his chest in a primal, anguished wail. The man who had won everything had lost the only two things that had ever mattered. The night was cold, the kind that seeps into bones and weighs down the heart. Ryan stood frozen outside the modest, weather-worn house, a stark contrast to the luxury he was accustomed to. His polished shoes felt out of place against the cracked pavement. The porch light flickered, barely holding on, much like the woman he had come to face. For years, he had sealed this door shut in his heart. But now, the truth gnawed at his soul, and he found himself here, at the edge of a reckoning he could no longer outrun. His knuckles hovered above the door before he knocked, 3 hollow raps that echoed like a gavel. The door opened with a slow, weary creak, revealing a woman he barely recognized. Sophie. Her face, once radiant with life, was pale and gaunt. Her frame, once graceful and strong, had withered. Lines of sorrow etched her features deeper than time alone could carve. Her sunken eyes, however, still held the same soul, a flicker of the woman he had once loved beyond measure. She stared at him, her expression shifting from shock to something unspoken. Weariness, perhaps, or a sadness too old to revive. Ryan! Her voice was soft, brittle, like paper left too long in the sun. Ryan's throat tightened. Sophie, he managed, the name foreign in his mouth after years of silence. She leaned against the doorframe, her frailty evident, but her eyes were sharp. Why are you here? Ryan's gaze faltered under hers, 1,000 unsaid things pressing on his chest. He hesitated, the fortress of his pride still standing but cracking. I know. About Darren. About everything. Sophie's lips pressed together, and for a moment, there was something almost like a bitter laugh in her eyes. Years, she whispered. Years of silence, of punishment. And now you know. His voice trembled, weighed down with guilt and anger. At her, at himself. Why didn't you tell me? His fists clenched at his sides. Why didn't you fight for the truth? Her eyes flashed, and the frail woman before him suddenly carried the fire he had tried to extinguish. Fight, she echoed, her voice rising, raw and sharp. I begged. I pleaded. But you, she took a shallow, shaking breath. You never listened. You never wanted to. Sophie's voice cracked, but her eyes never left his. You didn't just take everything from me, Ryan. You made me a ghost in my own child's life. You burned my letters. You erased me from her world. Her voice trembled, her hands curling into fists. I watched Lily grow up from shadows and whispers, and every day, I died knowing she hated me for a lie. Ryan's jaw tightened. He started, but his voice broke under the weight of his guilt. I thought I was protecting her. You thought, Sophie cut him off, her eyes burning into his. But you never asked. You never let me explain. You decided the truth without hearing it. The room felt suffocating. Ryan's voice, stripped of its usual power, trembled. I was wrong. The words felt like broken glass in his throat. He paused, his pride clawing at him, desperate to survive. But you should have come to me sooner. You should have told me everything before. Sophie's frail frame shook, and she took a staggering step forward. I tried. But you didn't want the truth. Her voice was cold now, hollowed by pain. You only wanted revenge. The words landed like a blow, and Ryan staggered under their weight. His pride, his fury, every wall he had built to justify his actions, collapsed. Sophie's breath was shallow, and her voice softened, laced with exhaustion. All these years, you chose to hate me because it was easier than forgiving me. You let our daughter believe I was a monster because you couldn't face the possibility that you were wrong. Ryan's hands shook, and his voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know. Her eyes, dulled by years of suffering, flickered with something far colder than anger, disappointment. But you never wanted to know. You wanted to be right. Sophie's legs weakened, and she gripped the arm of the worn couch to steady herself. Instinctively, Ryan reached for her, but she pulled away. Don't, she rasped. You don't get to reach for me now. The distance between them felt endless, but Ryan's voice broke through it, hoarse and raw. Is it too late? She looked at him then, truly looked, through him, past him, and in her eyes, he saw the answer before she spoke it. Too late for us? Her voice was soft, fragile as glass. That died the day you chose hate over love. Ryan's chest heaved, and something inside him shattered. But for Lily, his voice cracked. It can't be too late for Lily. Sophie's eyes, clouded with sorrow, met his one final time. That choice was never yours to make. A racking cough stole her breath, and she stumbled. Ryan rushed forward, but she sagged against him, too weak to fight his support. Her body, so light and frail, felt like it was already slipping away. Sophie, he gasped, panic rising. Her lips, cold against his ear, whispered, dying. His world crumbled anew. No, I have nothing left to give, Ryan, she said softly, her head resting against his chest. You took it all. Her eyes fluttered, but her voice, faint and fragile, carried one last truth. Lily is yours to lose now. Don't make the same mistake twice. Her body grew still against him, and for a heartbeat, the world froze. Ryan's knees hit the floor, Sophie cradled in his arms, his heart breaking in ways he never knew possible. Pride had cost him everything. His wife, his family, his soul. And the cruelest truth of all, no apology could turn back time. The sky wept softly as rain drizzled over the cemetery, the earth soaked in grief. The air was thick with the scent of wet grass and wilting roses. Beneath a canopy of gray, mourners gathered, their umbrellas forming a sea of shadows around Sophie's casket. A soft hymn played, mournful and low, barely rising above the sound of the falling rain. Ryan stood apart, unseen behind a towering oak tree, his hands trembling in his coat pockets. His heart pounded, but it felt hollow, an organ reduced to ruins. He watched, his eyes burning, as Lily placed a single white lily, Sophie's favorite flower, onto the coffin. Lily, her cheeks wet with tears, spoke in a voice broken but clear. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm sorry I believed the worst. I wish I had known sooner." Her fingers lingered on the polished wood, as though trying to hold on to what she could never have again. Ryan's chest constricted, his fingers digging into his palms until they stung. Every instinct screamed at him to step forward, to hold their daughter, to say something, anything. But his feet felt anchored to the earth, weighted by the chains of his own making. The service ended, and the mourners began to drift away, but Lily remained, her eyes fixed on the grave. Ryan's breath was shallow as he finally stepped forward, his shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. "Lily!" His voice, rough and uncertain, broke the silence. Lily turned sharply, her eyes red and swollen, her expression unreadable. "You came," she said, her voice flat. Ryan's lips parted, his throat tight with emotion. He faltered, the words failing him. I needed to. She deserved that. Lily's gaze hardened, years of confusion and anger boiling over. She deserved so much more. Her voice cracked with sorrow and rage. You kept her from me. You, she swallowed, her fists trembling at her sides. You stole my mother from me. Ryan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me? Lily's voice rose, sharp and cold. From what? The truth? The chance to know her? She shook her head, her voice breaking. You didn't protect me, Dad. You punished me. You let me hate her, and now she's gone. Ryan's voice dropped to a whisper, pleading and broken. I was wrong. Lily's eyes, so much like Sophie's, narrowed with pain. No, you were cruel. The rain picked up, as if the sky wept with them. Lily's shoulders trembled, her voice raw. I can't be around you. Not now. Maybe not ever. She paused, her face twisting in agony. I'm staying with Aunt Claire. Don't call me. Don't try to fix this. You? Her voice broke completely, and her next words were barely a whisper. You already destroyed it. Ryan's knees nearly gave way, but he stood frozen as Lily turned from him, walking away with the final piece of his heart. The house was cold when he returned, too large, too quiet. His footsteps echoed against the marble floors that once felt warm with life. Now, every room was a mausoleum of memories. Framed photographs on the mantel stared down at him, happy moments that felt like cruel reminders. Sophie's smile, Lily's laughter, all gone. His heavy breath broke the silence as he collapsed into his leather armchair, his face buried in his hands. The air felt tight, suffocating with the absence of everything that had made his life whole. His eyes fell on the laptop on the coffee table, open, waiting. His hand trembled as he reached for it. A familiar title flashed on the screen. Valentine's proposal goes wrong. Shocking rejection caught on camera. His finger hovered, then clicked play. The video began, the laughter of onlookers ringing through the speakers. The scene was burned into his memory. Sophie standing stiffly as the man knelt before her. But this time, he didn't look at her face through the lens of betrayal. He watched it as a husband. Her expression. It wasn't joy. It wasn't guilt. It was horror. Then, he saw it. So brief he had missed it the first time. The moment Darren took her hand and Sophie pulled away. Her face twisted in anger and disgust. Her lips moved, words lost beneath the crowd's cheers. No. Stop. Then the camera, held by some eager stranger, had cut away. Ryan's breath hitched, his fingers trembling. He hit pause, and Sophie's face froze on the screen, caught between anger and heartbreak. He whispered hoarsely, "You said no." The video, set on autoplay, looped back to the beginning. Her voice, faint and distorted, repeated the same desperate refusal. His face crumbled, and the dam of his pride shattered completely. A raw, guttural sob ripped from his chest, the sound of a man torn to pieces from the inside out. His head fell into his hands, and he broke, weeping like a man drowning in his own regrets. The room was dark now, shadows swallowing the man who once believed he had won by walking away. His voice, a whisper, cracked and hollow, escaped his lips. I thought moving on meant winning. His voice shattered into the silence. But I lost everything. The video continued to loop, Sophie's final rejection playing over and over, a ghost of the truth he refused to see. The screen flickered, the sound of the crowd's cheers like mockery. Then, blackness. Only the sound of the video, looping endlessly, remained. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Ryan's shoes? Remember, sometimes pride costs more than we realize. See you in the next story.